Hey everyone, this is Divya here and welcome to Stringtierey. Today we're going to learn how to do color work in the technique of hand knitting or knitting with fingers. If you want to know about just about the technique of hand knitting, you can go back to my previous video. I'll put the link of the video in the description box below. So let's get started. So I have knit this sample for a couple of rows and I'm going to introduce a new color in the next row. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to knit 2 stitches in the next row, and now in the third stitch I'm supposed to introduce a new color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another color and I'm going to create a slip knot out of it, creating a loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that loop and insert it from behind into our next stitch, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue every alternate stitch in the second color. So once I have this loop in the stitch, I'm going to take the first color and go from behind and go into the next stitch. So creating a loop, creating a float behind. So this is called a float, the yarn which goes behind the overlapping the next stitch. We're going to keep this float as loose as possible. We're not going to tighten it or pull it together because then the work starts shrinking and the fabric does not lay out flat. So what we're going to do is, now that I have taken up this stitch here, I'm going to go take the second color, go from behind and pull out a loop into the next stitch. So we're going to continue this all throughout till the end. So I'm going to go to color 1 and I'm going to pull it out through the loop. I'm going to take the color 2, again overlap it into the next through the next stitch and pull it out into the alternating one. So now I have completed this row with alternating colors in each stitch. When it comes to color work, there are 3 main things that have to be taken care of. One, that the float behind is not very tight. It has to be loose and there is a way to ensure that it is loose enough. 2, in certain cases, as per the pattern suggests, we might have to carry over the yarn from one particular side to the other to work back into that direction. Third, we have to ensure that the float has to be secured if it's very, very long. So I'm going to show you all these 3 things one by one. So the first point, to ensure that the float behind is loose enough. So there's a method to do that when you're taking the float over to the next stitch, skipping one stitch and taking it over, ensure that you have a finger in between before you pull your next stitch. So this ensures that your float is not too tight and there is at least 1 finger gap between the 2 stitches. The reason why we do this is if your float is too tight, like I've shown this, I've pulled the float too tight and I've left the loop here, there is a chance of the work becoming shrinking and it will not be flat enough. So that's the reason why we will make sure that we have at least 1 finger gap in the floats that we leave so that it's easier to stretch and keep your fabric flat. So the second point is when we have to carry over the yarn from one particular side to the other. We do that by securing the yarn at certain points. So I'm going to show you how to do it. So considering that we have the second color on the left hand side and for the second row after this, we want the second color to be on the right hand side. So I'm going to carry this yarn throughout to reach the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm starting the next row with normal loops into each of these stitches. And now when I have to carry this yarn over, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the yarn, the one that I have to carry over to the next side, along with the loop, and I'm going to pull the yarn through both of these together. So only for this one stitch I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to leave this yarn below and cross over. If you can see, I'm crossing over and I'm taking it over into the next stitch. So when you do this, what happens is that the yarn is secured behind and doesn't float around loosely. So when you have these two, when you have to secure the yarn, so I did 2 stitches leaving the yarn behind. I'm going to secure it into the next point. So it doesn't matter what color you have, you only need to make sure that your yarn is secured with the next stitch. So I'm going to just take those two together and put my yarn through that, and then I'm going to bring it in front and leave it, and then cross over and pull the next stitch. So there you have it. So our yarn from that side has been carried over to the other side. So now when I have to work the next row, my yarn is on the right hand side. So for the third point, I have already done one row where I have these 2 stitches in the second color and a really long float behind. So what we're going to do is, whenever you have long floats like these, we're going to secure these floats in the next round. So I'm going to just continue doing the next row with another color and loops into each of these stitches. So now when I reach the center of the float, now if you see, I'm almost at the center of the float. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue the same method which we used while carrying over the yarn. I'm going to take the float and I'm going to hold it along with the loop, and I'm going to take my yarn and go through it. Then in the next stitch, I'm just going to cross over the float and pull out a loop. So there you have it. I'm just going to continue doing these remaining stitches. I'm going to show you how. So now if you see, we've secured this yarn in the stitch, and it no longer is a long loose float. So there you have it. These are the tricks and tips for doing color work in hand knitting or knitting with fingers, and I hope you find them really useful. If you find my video interesting, then do like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel to get more videos and tutorials in the future.